Hello and welcome everyone. This video will be the penultimate video in this series, covering alien abductions, alien encounters, UFOs, strange tales, and these range from physical sightings to experiences to strange unexplained objects detected on radars, and involve people and places like the military, like the Air Force, like the CIA and government. And if you like this sort of thing, I would also recommend subscribing so that you don't miss the final episode in this series. But without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is mint, apple and baobab tea, and join me as we explore the ultimate alien and UFO iceberg. In Tier 3, we have the Lake Baikal swimmers. So this is this wild case based in Russia, but more specifically based in Lake Baikal in Siberia. So this is actually the world's deepest and largest freshwater lake in the entire world. And this case takes us back to 1982, when these Soviet divers were diving down underneath the lake, and they saw what they described as an insanely fast-moving vehicle underneath the water, or in the water. They're also on record saying that there were these strange, glimmering, kind of almost shiny beings down there that were, swimming in and out of the shadows. And so they decided to try and capture one of these creatures. And according to the team, when they tried to capture one of these creatures, the creature used this small device which actually triggered a whirlpool, basically killing half of the diving team. So yeah, don't mess with these aliens in particular. They are not your friendly neighborhood alien. The creatures looked a little interesting: dark bodies, blue iridescent fins, and round heads with these big eyes on them. And creatures like these, as well as what people have described as, incredibly fast-moving vehicles, have been spotted and sighted by the locals over the years, by people who live in the area, by divers, by fishermen, and as well as sightings and encounters in the water. There's also evidence of strange lights and creatures outside of the water, on the shore, in the sky, all around Lake Baikal. It's a super cool case, in all honesty. It's a pretty cool little scary area. And there are some people that say that these creatures that live down there are in fact the same species of underwater alien that has been seen in other places around the world, and that this might have been one species that landed down here on Earth long ago and have made their home in various lakes and waters around the world. But who knows? The Battle of Magé, Brazil, 2020. So this is honestly an insane case. And this case took place in 2020, obviously, in Magé, an area just north of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And on that day, multiple locals witnessed this strange light in the sky. And it was actually caught on camera by multiple sources. Now, I think for me, what sets this apart from your, regular everyday UFO sighting is the movement behind this, and also the suppression of this movement. So when it first happened, when it first came out, the people who witnessed this, they caught it on camera, they started posting it to, various websites, and then they noticed on places like Twitter that some of their tweets were being censored. They were being shadow banned, they were being removed. Comments regarding this were also being deleted, as were mentions on YouTube, mentions on Reddit. And so it seemed like some powerful people were maybe, trying to get this suppressed, didn't want the information to come out. The people also tried to get a Twitter hashtag going, but that didn't really work out too well. And then the people thought that this light, this thing that they witnessed, might have been an alien craft. And there were also reports of gunshots, of explosions. So people started to think that perhaps this light was a UFO, and perhaps the explosions were maybe the government taking it down, maybe another craft taking it down. And so naturally they started to look in the area for crashed sites, for suspicious images, and then someone found this. And this is a Google satellite image of a small area just north of Rio de Janeiro that suspiciously has this teeny tiny area blanked out. What the hell, Google? Google came out and said that it was a glitch in the system, that this was like a reflection of light that hit the satellite and temporarily blinded it in that exact spot. But it is still a little dodgy. There were also reports of military presence in the area, cordoning things off, blocking off roads, arresting anyone that tried to get past. And it seems like there was at least some censoring, but potentially some very, very deep censoring by the Brazilian government, the Brazilian military. And so what exactly happened on that day is still, as far as we know, somewhat of a mystery. The Atacama Humanoid is honestly a very disturbing case. So the Atacama Humanoid was this tiny skeleton, like 6 inches tall, that was found in this abandoned mining town, Atacama, in Chile in 2003. And it is a very unique and peculiar case. As I said, the skeleton was only 6 inches tall, it had fewer ribs than a normal human, it had these deformed bones, this misshapen skull. I mean, you can see for yourself, it doesn't really look human. The official explanation was that this was a newborn child that had suffered these deformities and so was left and abandoned, which resulted in the skeleton of the Atacama Humanoid. But obviously, based on the fact that it doesn't really look human, people have claimed that this is the body of a alien race, of a strange tiny humanoid, or that this was some failed attempt at a human cloning experiment or some other equally weird project by the government. And while scientists have studied the DNA of the skeleton and said that it is, human DNA, skeptics have said that this is part of the conspiracy and that the scientists were coerced by the government in order to find these results, or that the DNA is at least mostly human, but that it is a alien-human hybrid, or a, branch and offshoot of humans that broke away long ago and developed faster than us and developed space travel, and so they are aliens, but they are also human. So yeah, as I said, if it is the body of a deformed kid, it is very sad, very tragic. And if it is an alien, it is also very sad because it's a dead alien, but also very peculiar and interesting. But either way, quite a memorable case. The Lonnie Zamora incident. So this was a UFO incident that took place in 1964 in Socorro, New Mexico. And it was in the early evening when this local police officer, Lonnie Zamora, called in a possible motor accident that he had witnessed. He called up and told the dispatcher that he would go check out this car crash. And then apparently he did, and he called up the dispatcher again and told him to look out his window to see if he could see anything strange in the sky, which he couldn't. And he also requested that the local sergeant meet him at his location. So it was all very strange, and when the sergeant got to Lonnie, he was basically like, "Why did you bring me out here? Can you start talking," sort of thing. And then Lonnie basically told him everything that happened. He said that at the time he was pursuing this car for speeding, and then he heard this loud crash or roar, as he described it, and he saw this explosion of a flame way in the distance. So he stopped pursuing this car. He thought that might be an accident, it might be a car crash or a dynamite shack exploding or something. So that was clearly the priority, to see if he could go and save anyone. And so after telling the sergeant this, he went with the sergeant to this crash site, or where he said he saw and heard the explosion, the flames. And when they got to the scene, there was sort of an accident. It wasn't anything super noticeable, but there were patches in the ground, burnt soil, burnt brush and grass. So there likely had been a flame or explosion of some kind here. And for now, that was it. Now, Zamora said before he made the last phone call, when he saw this flame over in the distance, he decided to get closer and saw this small white metal object. And next to the object were these two creatures or beings who were both wearing white. And he said he watched them for a short while before these flames started to come out of the bottom of this craft, and then it just took off and went away into the night. And that was basically the whole case. Now, people have suggested that Zamora might have been hallucinating, or that perhaps it was a mirage, light from the star Canopus, or that this was, an alien spacecraft, or that it was a government craft, either like a missile or some other kind of military craft, or a space-based lunar landing module or something that was being tested out in secret by the government. And actually, to commemorate the area and this case, and because there were a bunch of people actually going to the area, they decided to build these stone walkways and benches, etc., partly out of commemoration, partly just to make visiting the area easier. But importantly, it wasn't at the actual crash site, or the landing site or whatever, because there were rumors that it was still radioactive from that night. So, pretty cool case. The Antonio Vilas Boas abduction is an abduction that took place in 1957 in Brazil, and that was of this man named Antonio Vilas Boas, who was a 23-year-old farmer who was working late one night when he described what he saw as a red light or star in the sky. And this red light got closer and closer and closer and larger until he could actually make out what it was. And he said it was a circular or egg-shaped flying craft that had a spinning dome on top of it and a red beam of light shooting outwards. This craft, as I said, came closer and closer, and then it stopped and then started to descend upon Antonio. And it did come down quite close to Antonio, and unlike a lot of these alien cases, Antonio wasn't having this at all. He was like, hell no, I'm just gonna get the hell out of here. And so, since he was in his tractor at the time, he started to try and drive the tractor away, which, I mean, it doesn't make a really great escape vehicle. What does it go, like half a mile an hour or something? But the tractor itself wouldn't start. You know, the engine shut off, all of the lights shut off, and so Antonio jumped out, started to try and run away, and was captured by these small grey humanoids. They were around 5 feet tall, they were grey, they had grey outfits and gear on, you know, your typical alien stuff. And they had just small blue eyes. They didn't speak strictly, but they did communicate in not really words, but barks, he said. Literally being abducted by dog aliens. What an insane time to be alive. But slowly, more and more of these creatures came out of the craft. They took Antonio up into it. And once he was inside the ship, he went through the typical process, being stripped down, being laid out on a table. And for some reason, they covered his entire body in like gloopy gel. They took some blood from him, not from his arm or leg or neck or anything, but from his chin. And then they just filled this room with a strange gas that made Antonio incredibly ill. And he was moved a few more times from like room to room, and as he was being moved around, he noticed this strange red writing or symbols or whatever all around the ship in doorways, over, you know, arches or hallways. And so he remembered these as best he could and wrote them down later to help prove his story. And then this is where this encounter starts to get a little bit weird. He was moved to a final room, seemingly, and in this room was this small alien, this small female alien, who was, according to Antonio, very attractive and very naked. She had a pointed chin, these large blue cat eyes, long, elegant white hair, and then these two started to make sweet, interplanetary, consensual, I may add, intercourse. The lady alien, after all this happened, kind of gestured that she would take the child and raise it up in space, which, I mean, that's a bit rude. Antonio doesn't even get a say. And then she basically dressed Antonio and kicked him off the ship, with him saying he felt kind of used, like he had just been a stallion for the aliens or something. And then he went home. He did try to take something off the ship, you know, a strange piece of alien technology or an artifact or something, but apparently the aliens stopped him at every point, so he wasn't able to get any physical evidence. And when he looked at his clock, he saw that he was basically up there for 4 hours. And until the day he died, almost 40 years later, he stuck to his story and never changed it or went back on it in any major way. And after this, for several days after, he seemed to be suffering from dizziness, from nausea, from, as a lot of people have seemingly experienced, some form of radiation sickness. And that's the case of Antonio Vilas Boas. Quite interesting, I'd say, but as always, do heed, I think, NASA's warning about alien-human relations. Space STIs are no joke, people. A public service announcement by Connor's Curiosities. The Jerry Meiers encounter took place in 1970 Florida, where policeman Jerry Meiers was driving home after his shift, and from time to time he liked to go to this little area. You know, it was remote, it was near the water, and he sometimes used it to relax, to kind of decompress after work. And as he got to this area, as he was getting closer and closer to his spot, he started to notice this strange humming getting louder and louder. Eventually he saw a light starting to appear, and then the light got larger and larger and larger until what Jerry Meiers described as a space being appeared. Now this looked like, he said, a man in a spacesuit, and this being started speaking to Jerry, but speaking into his mind instead of his ears. So it wasn't like a sound from the being, it was like a sound from inside his own head, with this creature seemingly speaking telepathically straight into his brain. And this conversation was basically the alien being super interested in war. You know, he was asking Jerry what war was, how and why people were selected for wars, who started them, why they were started, and what the purpose of all of these weapons were. And I just imagine this like, okay, so what do mines do? Oh, they blow up? Okay. What do bombs do? Blow up also. And grenades? I think I'm starting to see a pattern here. And Jerry said that this conversation wasn't strictly like a normal conversation. Like, he would get asked the question, and then to respond, Jerry would just have to like think about the answer, but he wouldn't think about it like word for word. He said he felt this creature was like taking snapshots or little snippets or thumbnails of his memories. And so if you asked him like, what's your favorite recipe for pancakes or something, Jerry would just have to think about pancakes, about what they look like, and when this alien knew where in his brain the pancake memory was, you know, where it was kept, where it was sorted sort of thing, then the alien could quickly just go into that area, take all the pancake information, and that was that. Like, okay, it's roughly in the C9837 quadrant of Jerry's brain, filed right in between waffle and crepes recipes, and then the alien did the digging themselves. And from Jerry's perspective, he was only there for like 20 minutes max, maybe half an hour. But after the encounter, when he went back to his car, he had seen that over 2 hours had passed. And after all was said and done, even Jerry didn't fully know whether this was an alien encounter or like a time traveling encounter. Like, either he was in a time dilation or something himself, or this being that he met was actually a time traveler. So yeah, all in all, quite a unique encounter, I'd say. And for me, probably one of the more memorable ones. The Paciencia Abduction involved this creature, I know, terrifying, and took place in 1977 in Brazil, which Brazil seems to be the hub of a lot of these encounters, it would seem. But when this 33-year-old bus driver named Antonio La Rubia was just chilling at home, he was suddenly alerted to the presence of this huge craft, like 70 meters across, and he was soon abducted. Now, Antonio was sitting in a field near his home, and when he saw this craft, he started to run away, but was frozen by this super bright beam of light. Then, as he stood there kind of helpless, there was these 3 robot alien creatures that came out and took him up into the now landed UFO. He said they were around 4 feet tall, they had this large antenna coming out of their heads, and across their heads they had this strange row of bluish mirrors. But as I said, they were short, they were quite stocky, you know, well built, like little tiny Mike Tyson robots. And once he was inside, he was still mostly paralyzed, and he saw just dozens of these creature robot hybrids just like floating around everywhere, doing ominous things, alien things. They were measuring him, they were prodding him, they stuck him with a syringe at some point, full of God knows what. And so, suddenly, Antonio just got the courage, I guess, to just scream at them. And he just said, "What do you want? Who are you?" And this sound of Antonio screaming just, I guess, caused all of the aliens to collapse onto the ground. And after screaming at them and disorientating them, the little antenna that was coming out of their heads seemed to be kind of a solid antenna beforehand. But when they were knocked out, this antenna stopped spinning. And Antonio realized that it was actually kind of shaped like a spoon, but when it was spinning round and round and round and round, it looked like a solid antenna, which which I don't know why that information is relevant, but it adds some detail to the encounter. While he was in the craft, he thought he heard something like the robots breathing, like in and out, which at the time he said he thought was weird because, robots don't really breathe. And within the craft, Antonio said there was this strange device, like a box or something, that produced these images. And these images were of various scenes. One of Antonio lying naked on a table, another of Antonio again naked, but this time standing up with no table in sight, then of a horse and a cart, then a giant orange ball. There was a factory, a base of some sort, a dog, a tunnel, just a whole range of things, with some of the scenes seemingly being from the present and some being from the future, which after Antonio was released, he seemed to almost fulfill some of these future images. He, as is pretty usual, suffered from sickness, nausea, dizziness, and was looked over by a bunch of different doctors, psychologists, who said he was of fairly sound mind and they couldn't find any physical explanation for his symptoms. So yeah, a pretty gnarly case with some cool looking alien robots, or robot aliens, and also with their wavy tentacle-like arms. Pretty creepy. The Hungarian Alien Graveyard. So this was a graveyard discovered in Hungary, and it is thought to be from around like the 400s, making it somewhere in the ballpark of like 1600 years old. And as I said, it was discovered in the 1960s. And as you might have guessed, this is no ordinary graveyard. The bodies and skeletons and skulls found inside of this graveyard seem to be, for some people, outright proof of aliens. And as you can see by the skulls of some of these remains, there are a ton of deformities, slimmer and elongated skulls. And there were certain traditions about, feet wrapping, about skull wrapping. So that does tend to be the skeptic explanation for all this. But there are others who believe that this was an alien race of some kind. Maybe they lived here for a while, maybe they just crash landed. And when the bodies were found, the local people just ended up burying them. So, they are pretty strange, and definitely let me know your thoughts on this one down below. Chinese communication with aliens. So this is a reference to the huge Chinese Sky Eye telescope, which is actually the world's largest radio telescope, and it purportedly picked up radio alien signals in 2022. There were actually two suspicious reports on this, one in 2020 and the other in 2022. And even more strangely, China actually released these out as a, announcement, but then afterwards quickly retracted them and censored the information and references to them all across China. And because it's China, the only information we really have about these is kind of whatever China is willing to, allow or to release. And there are kind of more or less two beliefs about this one. Either China had these discoveries, these radio signals, and figured that they were from an alien source and then hid and suppressed them from the people and from the world, or they got something wrong in these signals, some technical error, or maybe the scientists were off or wrong about something, and they were just so embarrassed that they had to take it down, and that is why they were censored. But yeah, it is pretty strange. They did kind of basically kill the story nationwide, stopped any references to it or any mention of it, and it is for me a very interesting story, as well as aliens. I do like the space stuff, sciencey stuff, radio signals from distant galaxies and stars and all of that. And I think it makes for a nice, interesting change from the typical alien abduction stories on this iceberg. Cosmic pluralism. So this is a concept that broadly covers the idea of multiple or plural worlds, other than Earth, that contain or harbor life. Now, these other worlds can range from actual physical planets to dimensions to stuff like religious ideas, other realms or an afterlife or something. And as you might have guessed, this idea or concept goes way back into the past. Humans were probably debating this as far back as we could debate anything. There was an ancient Greek philosopher, Anaximander, who used to discuss things like this. And even before that, there were likely, individuals, tribes, free thinkers, random dude sitting in a cave somewhere who would actually throw this idea around. And it seems to be quite a popular thought and question even to this day. Are we alone in the universe? And over the years, as you can imagine, there were different versions of this. Everyone had their own spin and their own take on these ideas. And a few of them, like Plato and Aristotle, were convinced that there was only one world, our Earth, and that it was wholly unique, it was an individual, and that we were alone in this universe. And this idea was just further reinforced by early Christianity. The idea of one origin story, one people. They don't talk about multiple civilizations, multiple children of gods on other planets in the Bible. And so, after Christianity got woven into the Roman Empire, that kind of influenced the world basically up until today. But for medieval Islamic scholars, this wasn't necessarily the case. You had a few who talked about ideas like this, and one scholar, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, wrote that maybe you see that God created only this world, and that God did not create humans besides you. Well, I swear by God that God created thousands and thousands of worlds, and thousands of humankind. And they often used quotes from the Quran to, reinforce this idea, to back up their beliefs. And one of the common ones was a quote saying that God was the Lord of the worlds, not just world, but worlds plural. And that the idea is that we are so small compared to God, and who are we to say that he has only made this one world, but that he has in fact made maybe infinite worlds, but at least many worlds, all with humans or their versions of humans all over the place, and God basically controls all of this. And I think it was a way of saying basically that who are we to put limitations on God? And the whole thing is quite an interesting idea, I think, at least for me, as this one ties in space, aliens, science, religion, and even stuff like history and philosophy. So yeah, super fun one and a very interesting topic. The 2009 Norwegian spiral anomaly. So this happened in 2009, obviously, in Norwegia, obviously, and this is where this spirally bluish grayish light appeared in the sky and was seen by many people and lasted for about 10 minutes. Now it looks to be a beam of light that kind of shot out from this mountain area and then exploded in this spiral of light, which is pretty cool. And as I said, this was seen by hundreds of people, potentially even thousands of people. And at the time you had all of these people calling into the local space meteorological, unit or institute in order to report what they were seeing. Others were saying it might be a secret government or military weapon, or that it was perhaps a scientific one, like an accident at the Large Hadron Collider, which had maybe opened up a portal or dimension or something, which, I don't really know what it was, but let me know some of your best theories on this one down below. The Isidoro Ferri encounter. So this took place in 1984 in Polcanto in Florence, Italy, where a man by the name of Isidoro Ferri was just sleeping at home when he was awoken by a super bright beam of light hitting his face. Now, this case is a bit all over the place, but from what I could gather, there was this intermittent red light that appeared outside where Isidoro was sleeping, and he said that when the light was shining, it would basically blind or hurt Isidoro, causing him to flinch in pain and have red eyes for the next few days. And Isidoro first thought that this was a poacher of some kind, a man coming in with a head torch or something, looking about for any loose swine lying around that he could throw up into his backpack, be on his merry way, one swine richer. But this figure was moving around very strangely, very alienly. As I said, the red light hurt his eyes, and the light actually seemed to paralyze him. The family dog, who seemingly barked at everything normally, notably was just completely silent. And for days after this, the dog refused to eat, and it more or less stayed in its, doghouse, refusing to come out, refusing to bark at anything. It seemed to have alien PTSD or something. So yeah, honestly a pretty strange case. They did find these 3 strange holes in the ground near where the figure was seen, and all of the locals said that Isidoro was an honest man, he was a sensible man. Why on earth would he make anything like this up. And also to back up Isidoro's testimony, there were other separate people who also saw lights of some kind in the area at the time. So, I mean, I personally had never heard about this case, but it is definitely a fascinating one to read through. Abductions in Lower Silesia refers to these abductions that took place in Silesia, Poland in 1985. This was in Legnica in Poland, and Mr. Władysław, which I probably just butchered that Polish name. It's either Władysław or Vladislav, but he had a shop. He finished work, he closed up his shop at around 6 p.m. and he made his way home. And this is where things start to get a little strange and unusual. While he was on his way home, he started to have these time skips, these memory lapses, and he doesn't remember exactly the journey, but he does remember ending up in a nearby field. And when he was suddenly in this field, he, looked around, he looked up, and he saw this large craft hovering above him. And he said it was huge. It was like bigger than the entire village. He said it was oval in shape, it had these blue lights all around the edges, and then suddenly he found himself just engulfed in this blue light and, sucked up into this craft, and he was in this singular room with these blue tinted lights everywhere. And there was also in this room with him these two strange beings who had these blue jackets on and blue hoods, which, I mean, there's a lot of blue here, but they were more or less the same height as humans, he said. When they walked, they didn't seem to really move their feet or their legs. They, hovered or floated around everywhere. He said they might have had wheels in their feet, which I think hovering is a slightly more likely explanation. But they eventually bring him to this other room, sit him down in what he describes as a dentist chair, and just start talking to him like, don't be afraid, you'll be fine, everything will be alright, which honestly would make me even more terrified. And he said he felt that these aliens weren't like speaking to him, but rather similar to one of the earlier cases. He felt that they were like signaling these words into his brain, like speaking to him telepathically, I guess. And then they do a few minor experiments on him. They take some samples, they take some data, and they, talk about the normal stuff, world peace, international relations, all the alien talking points. And then suddenly he is down back in this field, and he just makes his way home. Now, these abductions happened to him multiple times over the years, and he would often go through memory lapses and time shifts. He wouldn't know where he was, how he got there. He was in a field, he remembered being abducted again, and sometimes he would get abducted, be back in this field, go home, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, only to realize his car wasn't on his property. So he took the, public transport into town, went to his shop to open up, and there was his car. So it seems like he hadn't even taken it home on a few of these occasions, which begs the question, how did he get to the field and how did he get home? So a very odd series of events. Over the years, these abductions got less and less frequent until they actually stopped altogether. And another interesting part about this case, he said that he felt this weird, hard thing on his thumb, which he was convinced was a microchip implanted by these aliens. And so he said he didn't want to get it removed because he had been not abducted for so many years that if he did get it removed, it might anger the aliens and they might start abducting him again. So yeah, a very obscure case, a very rare one, I would say. It's not in the least bit mainstream or popular, but it is an interesting case nonetheless. The Lake Champlain UFO abduction. Now, there have been a few abductions and encounters kind of in and around Lake Champlain over the years, but we'll just go over this specific one that occurred in 1907. But this is when the governor of Vermont, of all people, was having dinner. He finished up, he went outside for some fresh air, and it should be noted that he was with two other men at the time, A.A. Buell and John S. Michaud, who were not unimportant people in their own right. They were quite well-known, quite respected men. But as I said, these men went outside for some fresh air, and they heard or saw this huge explosion above them. And when they looked up, they saw hovering overhead this 6-foot-long torpedo-shaped craft, they said. The craft itself was kind of dark, it was kind of tinted with copper, and after a short while it just zipped away and disappeared into the sky. And that was more or less it. Oh boy, that was quite a short case, wasn't it? Okay, I guess we can cover the case of the 1967 encounter. And this is where Michael Lapp and Janet Cornell were both sunbathing at the Buff Ledge summer camp when they saw these three strange aircraft up above them in the sky. And one of the aircraft kind of stayed hovering overhead, near them. And the other two went and shot off towards Lake Champlain. As I said, one of them just stayed there, hovering above them menacingly, and they heard this strange noise, this sort of buzzing or humming, and this just got louder and louder as this one aircraft got closer and closer. Eventually, it got so close that the pair could see through the, craft's dome, and they saw just these beings or creatures or something within them staring out at them as they were sunbathing. And just then, before they could do anything, the pair was shot with this beam of light. They were paralyzed, they were taken up into the craft, and they described these creatures as small creatures with huge eyes, no ears, and they said they spent a bit of time up in this craft before eventually being just released, let go, back down to the camp to tell their tale. And that was just 2 cases around this area, but there are honestly loads of encounters around this area, especially in places like New England for whatever reason. And I don't know why aliens and creatures seem to like this part of America, but it is what it is. Tier 4, the Japan Airlines cargo flight 1628 incident. Now, this case happened in 1986 with this plane, a Boeing 747, flying from France to Japan. And during the flight, mid-air while flying over Alaska, the pilot, Captain Kenji Terauchi, said that he saw out of the windows these 3 strange flying objects. And he said they weren't planes, they weren't crafts of any kind that he recognized, and so he radioed them in. He was told to basically take evasive maneuvers to get away from them or to dodge them. I mean, nothing too fancy because this was a Boeing 747, but yeah, he slowed down a little bit. He changed his trajectory, did like circles, went up and down and all that, did a few little loop-de-loops, and still after all of this, he said these things were still following him. He said one was actually bigger than the other 2, so he thought 2 of them might have just been regular space alien crafts, and the other might have been like the mothership or something. But yeah, these crafts were only seen by this airplane. There were some other airplanes somewhat in the area, and they said they didn't see anything. And when the plane landed, the crew, the pilot, all of the staff, they were like interviewed, and doctors checked them, to see if they had alcohol in their system, or if they had substances, or if they were maybe hallucinating. But all of their systems were incredibly clean. Their minds were all there and clear. This didn't seem to be like a mass hallucination of any kind. And so what the crew members actually saw is, to this day, seemingly a mystery. Other explanations say that perhaps Kenji saw like Jupiter and Mars out of his window, which for an experienced pilot might be a little far-fetched. It could be possible, I don't know. But it also doesn't explain the 3rd craft that he saw, unless the 3rd craft was like the sun or something. But yeah, as I said, that is as far as the case went. UFO over Slovenia. So this is a very interesting case, I think, because it once again involves a pilot, a captain, a plane, and a UFO sighting. But with this one, we actually do have the air traffic controller, recordings to listen in on this conversation that took place. So this involved flight TOM 7KL, and it was just last year actually, in 2023, and it was going from Rhodes to Nottingham in England. And while it was over Slovenia, it called in to air traffic control to ask them a few questions.
A bit of a strange question, but in about our 1 to 2 o'clock position in the distance, I don't know, maybe about 40 or 50 miles away. Are there any military aircraft doing an exercise?
You said 40 miles, 1 o'clock. So just 7 Kilo Lima, actually no reports of any military traffic.
Okay, I've copied. At this time we've got a bright light that's shining towards us, and just before I called you, it had been shining towards us, and then it disappeared and became flashing lights that were then jumping around in the sky, and then it returned back to a constant light shining at us.
The captain asked if there were any, extra flights or military operations or something taking place in a particular area in the sky nearby them. And after a while, the air traffic controller gets back to them and says that no, there's no extra flights or military occurrences or anything like that taking place in the area. And the pilot replied that, okay, that's a little strange because we are seeing this odd craft or light or something in the sky, and it seems to shine something at us and then kind of go away a little bit, and it didn't seem like a plane. There was no registered planes in that area, and as the controller said, there were no military operations either. So the air traffic control couldn't explain it, the crew members, the pilot, the captain couldn't explain it, and that is more or less all we know about this case at the moment. There were a few news stories written about it, mostly those in Slovenia, and yeah, it is a pretty unique, pretty interesting case, I would say, especially so because we get to hear the behind the scenes of the call that was sent out. But as I said, we don't know what it was. The Conil Incident is an interesting one involving this scary little fella, the Conil alien. So this all took place in 1989 in Spain, and at the time, around this particular beach, Los Bateles, there were these strange lights in the sky, these strange sightings, and this became sort of like a local attraction. Like the locals would sometimes go down to the beach at night and sometimes see strange lights, sometimes they wouldn't. But on this particular night, September 29th, these 5 young locals headed down to the beach, and they were just looking to chill there, look at the lights, maybe see something interesting. And after about an hour, they saw this strange crescent-shaped object that had red lights in it, and it was just kind of floating menacingly with not a care in the world, with no direction, until it started to float towards the nearby village. Then the group said they saw these 2 other lights, one at a nearby port and one seemingly directly overhead. And then suddenly, shortly after, there appeared these 2 creatures, these 2 beings, these 2 humanoid beings, dressed all in white with no face or even hair, which is absolutely terrifying. And the beings started to just walk up to the group, which caused them to just become terrified and just get the hell out of there, as I think any sane human would. So the group ended up backing up a little bit, but they could still see the beach from where they were, and they said that these beings were like interacting with the lights somehow. The lights kind of floated down towards them, they passed the lights between each other, and then they were joined by a 3rd different looking creature, being, and after a series of these morphs and changes and strange things, the 2 beings started to look more and more human. They shrunk a little bit, started growing hair, growing facial features, and even somehow donned like normal human clothes, flannel jacket and some jeans. And then these 2 beings started to walk towards the town, which a few people in the group tried to follow them, tried to track them to see where they were going, but they ended up eventually losing them. It was foggy, it was a little hard to see, and yeah, they lost track of them. And the 3rd being, the one that was left on the beach, he or it suddenly stared at the group, and then this crazy, thick, strange fog, mist, cloud came in from the sea, and the group just again completely lost sight of this being. Now, they waited a while after everything had kind of cleared up in a way, and eventually they went down to the beach. They saw these strange footprints in the ground. Like, some of them were huge, they had like 4 digits, 4 fingers, 4 toes sort of thing, and they were leading from the beach into the town. Now, over the next few days, a man named J.J. Benitez, who was a ufologist, he heard about this news in the town. He immediately went over to the town, he arrived there, started doing his little investigation, and he said he discovered that these 2 beings had actually walked from the beach into town and rented out a hotel room, because I guess, he asked who had stayed there the previous night, checked a bunch of different lodges and hotels, and found that last night 2 humble Dutch engineers had walked in, took a room, and by this point were nowhere to be seen. So yeah, very strange, a little spooky with them, imitating humans, blending into society sort of thing. And after this, there were a few sightings around this beach, but when the people approached these beings on the beach, they just seemingly walked into the ocean and completely disappeared. So quite an interesting one, quite a unique one, and it comes all the way from Spain of all places. So how about that? The Levelland UFO Case. So this was this fascinating one that took place in Levelland, Texas in 1957. And this is when these two farm workers, Pedro Saucedo and Joe Salas, they called the police in order to report this strange thing that they saw in the sky. So the pair were driving along at night when they suddenly saw this strange, ominous blue light in the sky. And then their engine in the car died, which is very strange. And this object, which they said was kind of rocket shaped, it started to slowly approach the vehicle, which is a little terrifying. So one of the men jumped out of the car and said he just experienced these massive vibrations, humming, buzzing. He said he felt this immense heat. There was crackling, almost like thunder overhead, but it didn't really feel like thunder or look like a thunderstorm. And this thing didn't stop above them, but simply kept on going. And when it got far enough away, the heat kind of dissipated, the engine started back up again, and for the most part, that was it. And at first, when these two men called this into the police, the officer who answered the call, AJ Fowler, thought that this was a prank of some kind, maybe, two drunk guys out of their minds, and said to them like, yeah, absolutely, I'll follow up on this. I'll get out there right now. So didn't take it very seriously. But about an hour later, another call came in, reporting a huge bright object that was just chilling in the middle of the road, blocking this guy's path. Now this was also around Levelland. The man said he had been driving along, and as he got closer to this thing, his car just completely cut out, and so he was more or less stuck there. But as the man got out to investigate, this object, whatever it was, seemingly took off and away, the lights kind of faded on it, and his car started back up again. Then there was also a married couple who called in that night, and they also reported a flashing thing floating across the sky and reported their electronics dying. And so honestly, what the hell is going on here? And these weren't the only reports of this incident. There were like dozens of reports all around Levelland, all at the same time, or at least on the same night, about this weird blue floaty thing flying around the area and basically breaking people's cars and electronics. And these weren't just, alien buffs, conspiracy theorists sort of thing. This was like the fire chief in town, the bloody sheriff himself. Like, this was a big deal. And this whole case was investigated by the Air Force later on as part of Project Blue Book. And they went in there, they interviewed a few people, they basically concluded that this was ball lightning or some other freak event of nature. And this conclusion that the Air Force came to was basically kind of questioned and doubted both by locals and by people interested in UFOs. Like, the Air Force came in, they interviewed a few people, but lots of people said that they didn't interview enough people, that they didn't investigate for long enough, that they said that there was thunderstorms in the area on the night, even though all the locals say that wasn't thunder at all. And they said, for instance, the testimony of the farm workers was unreliable because one of them only had a grade school education and had no concept of direction, which I just thought was hilarious. Like, having a bad sense of direction is one thing, but no concept of direction. Like, geez, how often would you get lost on a daily basis? You're just going up and down and left and in and no concept of it whatsoever. And that's more or less as far as the case went. As I said, it was investigated by Project Blue Book. Nothing really much came of that. And so what everyone actually saw on that night is, to this day, still a mystery. Alyoshenka. So this one is very, very weird and a little similar to another case we covered earlier, the Atacama Humanoid. So this case starts in 1996 in this remote Russian village, Kalinovi, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. All of my Russian viewers can comment down below and let me know. But in this village, this slightly crazy local old woman named Tamara Prosperina was out for a walk in the woods one day when she heard this crying, and she thought it sounded kind of like a baby, so she followed the noise. It got louder and louder as she got closer, and eventually she came across this baby that was lying there on the floor. But this baby was a little strange. It was like teeny tiny. It was only 10 inches tall. And so she took the baby, took it inside back to her home. She called it Alyoshenka, and she started to more or less care for it. And as I said, this baby looked very strange. It was seemingly deformed. It had a weird, strange shaped head. It had grey skin, these big eyes, these misshapen bones. And I know what you're thinking. Tamara was clearly insane. She was just making the whole thing up. Except some locals did actually see this baby, as did Tamara's daughter-in-law, who said she came over one day. She saw that Tamara was taking care of this baby and that it looked incredibly strange. You know, these misshapen teeth in its mouth, this weird red kind of tube as a mouth. And soon after this, Tamara was taken in for psychiatric evaluation because, you know, she had been acting a bit crazy, a bit loopy. And while she was there was no one actually at home to take care of this baby. And so, according to Tamara, it ended up dying. Its remains were later found by one of Tamara's relatives inside the home. And then an investigation was started. The body was taken away for safekeeping. And then it just went missing. Like literally, although we have photos of it, nobody knows where the body actually went, who currently has it. Some people believe that these aliens came down and took the body back. Others believe that this was just a distraction and the Russian government actually came in to secure it. And some people think it was a hoax or a prank. Some people think it was an actual alien species or an alien human hybrid or a government secret experiment, a failed clone or something. Or there's actually the local folklore that tells of these strange, tiny humanoid creatures living in the forests and the caverns nearby. So that could always be the explanation. Another explanation that's been thrown around is radiation, as there was a local, somewhat of a recent meltdown in the area, and people think the radiation might have got far enough out, actually mutated some mothers and their babies, and so this was the result of, you know, radiation mutation. It could be a lot of these, but as I said, it is a little hard to investigate when the main piece of evidence no longer remains. The Calvine UFO Suppression. So the Calvine UFO was this UFO, and this was seen in Calvine, Scotland in 1990. Now, according to the report, two men were just walking along in the hills, in the moors, and suddenly they saw this strange craft in the sky. So the men ran for cover, kind of afraid of what might happen, and when they were safe, they started to take these photos. And lo and behold, alien spacecraft. And when they had the photos, they went to the newspaper, the Daily Record, and they interviewed them, they gave them the story, they gave them all of the photos and the negatives, and the story and the event was just completely suppressed, and the images were never released. The Daily Record never posted this story, and the Military of Defense apparently came in, silenced the newspaper, took all of the photographs, and just like the One Ring, this entire event, this entire case, just kind of fell out of knowledge until years later, in 2009, rumors and memories of this encounter started to pop up from various sources, and some documents were actually released into the National Archive by the Ministry of Defense. And through these documents, one of these original photographs was actually found and recovered. The Daily Mail ended up posting a story about it, posting this photograph, and actually on the back of one of the photographs was this signed name of Kevin Russell. Now, because this story was more or less buried, more or less suppressed, the names of the two men who originally took the photographs has never been known, but I think it was a decent assumption that maybe Kevin Russell was one of their names. So investigators took this name, they took the, time frame and the area, they did intense investigations and research trying to find the man, but sadly they never could. So we have these photographs, but we don't know who took them or why the story was originally so heavily suppressed. Batteries not included, and oh boy, this is a fun film. And this was actually produced by Steven Spielberg, and basically the plot is, and obviously spoilers ahead, but the plot is that this elderly couple basically manages this apartment building, and the owners of the building basically want to do some development on it, some major development, tear the whole thing down, sell it, but there are tenants actually living inside the building. So they say, you can't sell this as people living here, it's their homes. And the evil property developer says, I don't care, I'm gonna sell it, so you better, get these people out. And the elderly couple actually runs a cafe in the building, so they as well obviously don't want to leave. And this results in the property developer sending through threats. They basically hire like these thugs to go around there, intimidate people, threaten people, and vandalize the building, spray paint it. And because of this, one or two of the tenants actually agree to leave. They say, you know, this is way too stressful, I can't live here. The elderly couple actually ends up almost giving up, but just before they do, you know, just at the end, there's no hope, nothing they can do. Then these tiny living alien spaceships come into the building, and they just basically start fixing things up, you know, cleaning graffiti off walls, repairing broken damage, and basically helping the tenants and the elderly couple defend the building. They find out that one of these weird alien spaceship thingies is actually pregnant, and she gives birth to 3 smaller alien spaceship things. And so the rest of the film is them basically defending the building from these, you know, evil developers, and them making friends with these spaceship aliens. So yeah, a little bit of an unusual one, definitely a fun one. I had to, you know, slip in there. If you like kind of wholesome, well-written movies, definitely go and check it out. The Westall UFO was a sighting that happened in 1966 in Australia, where some students and a teacher said that they saw this strange object, this silvery whitish object floating around in the sky. And initially they saw this thing, saw it kind of hovering around for a bit, and then descending down below this row of trees. So the students and the teacher went over there to investigate, and the accounts of what happened after this are a little all over the place. You know, there's slightly different details from testimony to testimony, but the general idea is that they went over there, they saw this craft landed on the ground, or some say it wasn't landed, but it was hovering really close to the ground. And the Air Force did investigate this one. They found in the area like burnt patches, they found flattened patches, but all in all, the Air Force wasn't really impressed, and they said there was nothing of interest in this case. And some don't really know what to believe. Some think it was a hoax, some say it was a weather balloon that they saw, others say that it was an actual alien spacecraft, others still say that it was some sort of secret government technology, so it's still a little bit up in the air, if you'll pardon the pun. 1973, Judy Doraty, and oh my lord, I love this website, like straight out of the 1990s. But this case covers the abduction of Judy Doraty in Houston, Texas in 1973. Judy and 3 other women had just finished up this bingo game. When they left, they were driving along and they saw this strange light up in the sky. A few of the women exited the car, they looked up at this thing, and you know, it was kind of an impressive light in the sky, and then they went back into their car and drove away. So nothing strange to see here. But Judy started to suffer from headaches, migraines, anxiety, and after undergoing hypnosis, she came to realize that she had been abducted on that night. She said she basically experienced 2 experiences at the same time. She said simultaneously she was standing outside the car looking at the light, but also at the same time being abducted by this light. She said she was zooped up along with a cow, and while the cow was being dissected, pulled apart in every which way, she was just more or less being made to watch. They did a few minor experiments on her. She said they also had her daughter Cindy up there, which Cindy was actually one of the people in the car with her. But she said they had Cindy up there on an operating table. She was begging them to let her go, to stop doing whatever they were doing. And these aliens just ignored her, continued to, you know, bop around her daughter. And yeah, that's kind of all she remembers. Years later, her daughter Cindy did go under hypnosis as well, and she said she came to the same conclusions as her mother did. You know, she had very similar memories of that night, and her story kind of lined up with Judy's. Now, whether this is because they talked about them beforehand, or whether it was an actual genuine memory, you know, it's very hard to tell. But Judy said while she was on board, these aliens gave her this strange substance, and this thing that they gave her was actually causing her migraines. There was also some evidence that the Air Force had tried to stop Judy talking about this event, tried to suppress it in some way, but apart from that, there doesn't seem to be much evidence for it. Judy said the other women on that night were likely abducted as well, but they just don't remember it, like, Judy and her daughter originally didn't remember. But that's more or less where the case sits today. The Bentwaters UFO Incident was a very strange case involving not a civilian UFO sighting, but rather personnel from the British and American Air Forces. And this was in 1956 in England, and they detected on their radars these strange, abnormal flying crafts, flying objects, and is one of the cases written about and recorded in the original Project Blue Book. And on the night of August 13th, these local radar operators were tracking this object in the sky on their radars, and this object was coming from the sea towards the Bentwaters base at, it seems, several thousand miles per hour, which is insane speed, especially for something in the World War II era, or, just after World War II. They also detected several other smaller objects on this radar, and they seem to, eventually clump together into one larger object, and the size of this large object on the radar was absolutely bonkers for the time, and that is still to this day unidentified. After seeing these things on the radar, they told their men to, look out of the base, look into the sky, but they couldn't really see anything. And then they saw another thing traveling at these crazy speeds, and it was followed by a bright flash of light. And this light was, zipping across the sky, and it was seen by both people on the ground and also by pilots in the sky. And they had a few of these at the time. They tried tracking them, they tried keeping track of them, but eventually they just went on their merry way out of, the range of radar, and they were never seen again. So whether they were alien spacecrafts, secret alien or government technology, or just something else entirely, we have no idea. And that is all we have time for. The final part of this series will be out soon enough, covering the bottom 2 tiers of this iceberg. But for now, I hope you're having a lovely day and or night, and as always, thanks for watching.